Martin Scorsese spoke to us a couple of days ago. I loved the fact he apologised for not knowing. I mean, how outrageous! He didn't know the name of that camera. It is advertised everywhere, and a lot of the fascination is the fact that it says, it's a Martin Scorsese film, and it is a U certificate,
and it is in 3D.
It contains scenes of mild danger. Apparently, that's what it says on the BBFC app, which I've just checked. And anyway, it's Scorsese. We talked 3D. We talked about this film. We mentioned Sir Ben Kingsley and Asa Butterworth. That's the central relationship. Here's what Mark thinks.
Well, it's just been named by the National Board of Review of Best Film of the Year, and I have to say I like it very much. And clearly not alone in this. The thing that I liked most about it is it's sort of a love song to the mechanics of early cinema. And if you're somebody who has an interest in the way in which early cinema started up, then there is so much in that. The way that the automaton is connected to the projector. There's a line in it in which Papa George says, the unmistakable sound of a projector. I could never miss the sound of a projector. And the time I interviewed Scorsese before, when he was talking about Peeping Tom, which he had overseen the restoration of Peeping Tom, and they had a special screening of it at BAFTA, and he was talking about the fetishization of the sound of sprockets. And there is actually a strange connection between Hugo and Peeping Tom, although one of them is an X-rated movie and the other, as you just said, is a U-rated movie. That at the heart of them, there is this fetishized thing about the mechanics of cinema. And I really like that because I'm really interested in all that stuff. The question, therefore, about whether or not it will entrance and enchant a younger audience who may not have, that same interest, is open. But I think that they will be drawn in by the mechanics of the automata, by the fact that from the very beginning, the whole set is laid out like the workings of a watch. At the beginning, we get this kind of sweeping shot of the camera coming in, going through the station, and everybody seems to be part of a machine. That central idea that Hugo himself says is that machines don't have any extraneous parts. That means we've all got a role to play. And I loved that about it. I thought it did that really beautifully, and it really worked very well for me. As far as the 3D thing is concerned, it's the best 3D film I've seen. And one of the reasons I think that I'm warmer towards the 3D in this than I have been in other films is partly because the film is so much about the mechanics of cinema and the mechanics of projection. As Scorsese was saying, and I've written about in my book, that 3D is...
You've got a book out?
Yeah, but I don't want to talk about me for a moment. 3D is as old as the history of cinema itself. It was a lovely thing. We're talking about the fact that the Lumieres remade The Arrival of a Train at a Station. Actually, one of the ideas that's put about at the moment is that The Arrival of a Train at a Station, we see that being shown in the film and then the audience running away. And there's a story about whether or not that is apocryphal, whether it was when it was shown in 1895-96 in a cafe in Paris, whether the audience really did run away. And then some people said recently, a bit of revisionist history, actually, no, they weren't running away from the 2D version. They were running away from the 3D version, which came later. That's baloney. If you do any sort of research into this, if the story exists at all, it's in relation to the first version. Actually, the 3D version wasn't very widely seen and certainly didn't inspire those press stories. The story of people running away from the screen may be apocryphal, but it's an apocryphal story that refers to the 2D version, not the 3D version. The idea
back to the film.
No, but that's important because actually one of the reasons that the 3D was less problematic for me in the film was that so much of the film was about the mechanics of watching this clockwork device, so much magic lantern, so much to do with the fact that this is a medium that has its roots in fairground, in theatre, in magic tricks, in illusion, in conjuring, and of course we see a lot of that in Hugo. That somehow, because the movie was so self-conscious about its form, it seemed to justify the self-consciousness of having to sit there with the glasses watching the movie in 3D. And I have to say that there were certain moments when, from where we were, which was up in the balcony of the Empire, I got a little bit of ghosting, which is I think is an unresolved problem. But certainly the 3D was less harsh and less forced than in many films I've seen. That's obviously to do with the way that it was filmed. James Cameron and Scorsese did an interview recently in which Cameron said it's the best 3D I've ever seen. And I think that is true. And I think that in the context of this particular story, it's the most justified use of 3D I've ever seen. I still don't think it's the future of cinema and that it will work for everything.
No, obviously Scorsese does.
He does, but that's fine. I give him 3 movies and see whether he's still doing it. I don't think he is going to do everything in 3D from now on, but I thought the story itself was enchanting enough and was enough about the mechanics of cinema and about the fact that 3D is so old and is so much wound up with the clockwork beginnings of cinema, somehow it seemed appropriate. And that did enchant me. And
the actors.
It's over to you for that.
No,
that's the human stuff.
Yeah, what the actors in the film.
Yeah, go on.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
I just think, I said Asa Butterworth, that is Asa Butterfield, who I think is utterly enchanting as the boy. And Martin Scorsese implied that it's because they cast Asa Butterfield that everyone else is English, because they didn't want him to change his accent.
Yeah.
But the relationship between him and, on the one hand, Ben Kingsley, Sir Ben, and Sacha Baron Cohen, who walks around trying to arrest him, I thought was fantastic.
And talking like Pete and Dud.
Well, it's something like Pete and Dud, and something like Eric Idle out of a Monty Python. I don't know what that accent is that he has.
I wasn't entirely sure about that broad comic performance. That felt slightly misplaced to me, but I'm going to go and see it again, and maybe I'll feel different the next time.
Child 3 has a birthday tomorrow, and
you're going to take Child 3. Well done.
I'm going to try and persuade him to see that over after Christmas, just because I think I just can't wait to see it again. Reviews to come in this hour, of course. Chris O'Dowd's going to be joining us to be talking about the Biffers, the Independent Film Awards, on the subject of Hugo, which is where we were just before.
Yes.
The news.
Which I do feel that we could just talk about pretty much for the rest of the hour, because there is a lot to say.
And it is utterly delightful and charming, and you've talked about the mechanics of the film. Here's the thing from Simon in Coppleston in Devon: would my 4-year-old enjoy this, or is she too young? And I would say
that's too young.
She's too young.
Yeah.
Even though it is a you, and there is nothing that will upset her in it.
No,
it felt to me, precisely because of all the movie stuff that you were talking about, it feels like a family film rather than a children's film. If Arthur Christmas is for children, then this is a family film.
It is, and it's interesting. 2001 was a U certificate film. When it was first submitted to the BBFC, they wanted to give it what was then an A rating, and Stanley Kubrick took against this, and he organised for a load of school kids to go see the film. And they all went to see it, and they decided there was nothing in it was disturbing, and he got the BBFC to give it a U rating. And nowadays, a U rating is generally seen to be kids' films only. There is a history in which U rating Kess was a U when it first came out, and this meant family film. Family film didn't mean kids' film; it meant film that can be seen by a wide range, not necessarily the very youngest, but by a wide range. And Hugo is, again, it casts back to that sort of thing, to that old nostalgic idea of what actually constituted a family movie. It's a U certificate movie in the same way that 2001 was a U certificate movie. I don't think you'd take a 4-year-old to see that. There is. Yes, I think what do you think? Sort of lowest age, 8 maybe, something?
Yes, I would think 8, 9, 10. So again, not because there is anything in there that they're going to will give nightmares or will scare them at all, but just because it feels as though it's aimed slightly older. I would say if you obviously never arrive late, because it is in the code of conduct.
It is,
if you arrive late, it's problem. But the first minute and a half, you sort of described it anyway. The opening scene, which zooms into Paris and then goes straight down in between two stations and then up into the clock where Asa Butterfield is hiding. It's just a magnificent.
But that is the heart of the whole thing, is that it's all like being inside clockwork. It's like being inside the sprockets of a projector. It's like being inside a machine in which the whole landscape is a machine. As I said, that central idea that machines don't have spare parts, therefore everybody has a role to play. And as I said, once again, I think that because it's so much about the mechanics, that's what makes, for me, the 3D kind of makes sense. Should also be clear, I still don't think that means that 3D, for everything.
So we know that.
No, I know.
Take that as read.
No, but I also want to be clear that I'm not so prejudiced against it that I can't look at a movie like Hugo and go, yeah, actually that works.
But it works because of the character which Ben Kingsley plays. It'd be nice if people go with an element of surprise about which direction the journey is going to take.
It can only go one way, Simon.
That's true. Michael Barton in Toronto. With the last Harry Potter film, the 3D was completely redundant, but I feel it was
retrofitted.
It was well crafted in Hugo and integrated to maximum use. Relevant as Hugo's world is about dimensions and machinery, living behind the train station walls amongst cogs, tunnels and clockwork. The 3D enhances the perspective of all this world. The scene where the mechanical man finally comes to life would compete with any scene in a classic Disney movie. Overall, though, the effect of the movie is greater than the story itself, which is over-contrived and muddled. I wasn't wholly convinced by the child actors. Sacha Baron Cohen felt as though he'd stepped off the set of Hello, Hello, but the character actors are well chosen, and the film does wonders at showcasing the work of Georges Méliès and a proper use of 3D. Which I think is fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all that.
I think the child actors are fantastic.
Yeah, I think. Yeah. I mean, it is true. I think the Sacha Baron Cohen part is the bit that I'm not quite as okay with.